Hello YouTubes, this is going to be a lecture about functions in C++. I've got a couple functions here. I want to show you what these functions are and how they work, and then after we can see that these are actually worthwhile, I'll show you how to make one from scratch and how to put them in other files so it's not all in just one main.cpp. We'll start first with this function here, getNumber, and this is a function I wrote that will safely ask for a number, and if you type a letter that would usually cause the cin object to crash, but this function right here will catch the crash, and if it does get caught, the error will be cleared, it'll ignore the bad characters, and it'll again ask for the input. I'm going to go ahead and show you how this works before I explain too much more. So in main, I'm going to make a new integer, I'll call it number, and I will ask for a number from my getNumber function. The getNumber function takes a argument, which is a message, and the message will just be, please enter a number, period. After the function, I will print out the number, maybe with a little message. Your number was... I'll wait at the end of the program as well so that it doesn't just immediately close on us. Let's run that and see what happens. So here it says please enter a number. I'm going to type 1, and there it says my number was 1 and it's waiting because of this getCh. I'm going to run this again, and this time I'm going to press A and B and some other letters that are clearly not numbers, and still it's waiting for a number, 12. There we go. So what is going on here? I'm going to show you using the debugger. I'm going to right there put a breakpoint and run the code F5 to go into debug mode, and it starts debugging. It's about to execute this line, but it's waiting for me to tell it that it's okay to execute. Right here we have the black window, and it's got nothing there because nothing has been printed out yet. I'm going to step into my function using the step into button here, and then it takes me here to getNumber. So, and what this code is saying is getNumber needs to execute, and the result of this function call is going to be given to this number. This is what we call resolving a function. So this function will resolve to an integer. And we know it'll resolve to an integer because the function right here says that it will resolve to an integer. So anyway, back to the function. The function starts here at the opening curly brace. It goes in here. Int value tells the computer program to allocate memory on what we call the stack so that we can use this variable, but it doesn't actually cause an instruction to happen, which is why it skips. Anyway, so we continue on here to the if statement, and it's checking to see if cin failed, and if I step in, it'll show me this really gross cin code inside of X iOS base. I don't want to look at that. I'm going to step out of it and step over all that because I don't really care about what cin is doing. Cin did not fail, so it didn't need to do all this. Now it's going to print out a message, a underscore message. A message is the argument that was passed into getNumber. Down here in main, getNumber was given a C string, and that C string was passed into the function as a message. So here it's being printed out, and then I'm going to skip over this, or step over, because I know what it'll do. It'll print out a message. There it is. Please enter a number. And then cin is going to wait for a value. I'm going to step over this as well because I don't want to see the really, well, this is the really gross cin code. I'm going to step out of here, and it's now waiting for a key press. I'll press J. And cin received its input. Value didn't get a value. This is the garbage value right here. Because cin failed, value doesn't get a value. So I'm going to step in. It goes into the while loop. This is a do while. Do while means that it's going to do everything inside of the loop at least once before it determines whether or not it needs to redo the loop. And it knows it needs to redo the loop because cin has failed. This is going to return true because I gave j as value. One of these, bad bit or fail bit, is true. I forget which one. I'm going to step out, and continue on, and there we go. We go back to the top. Now when it runs this if statement, it will recognize that cin did fail. Goes into cin clear, it'll clear it, it'll ignore the first 1024 characters or until the first new line. Then it'll again ask for a number. I'll give it a number this time, step over cin, and I'll give it 100. Now cin has not failed. Cin is good, so this condition will run. Because it hasn't failed, this will be false. The while loop will stop. I'll step out of this, and it goes to the return. Return has to do with this integer, and value is an integer, which is why getNumber resolves to this integer value. Step into here, it goes to the curly brace. So I'm going to step into here. It'll take me out of getNumber because we just finished running the getNumber function. getNumber has now resolved to 5. So this right here at the moment is 5, even though number is still a garbage value. If I step over this, now number, oh sorry, not 5, 100, because that is what I typed in here. And then it's going to print out, see out, your number was there, 100, and get ch. I've got a couple other functions that I wrote here, and I'll go ahead and show you uses for those. So this one just gets input. This one validates input. You give it input, and then it checks to see if the input you gave it was one of the valid inputs that it's allowed to receive. And this one right here checks to see if a value you gave it is within a range. So I'm just going to show you how all of these functions can be used with each other. I'm going to rewrite some code here to make this a little bit more interesting. How do you feel from 1 to 10? I'm going to use my isWithinRange function to see if my number is actually between 1 and 10. So if isWithinRange value, which would be number, if it's within 1 and 11, cout, thank you for following directions. And let's run that and see what happens. If I type in 5, thank you for following directions. I'm going to run that again, this time in debug mode. And it'll ask me to get a number. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and then press continue, so it'll run through all the code like it's supposed to. I'll put 5, and because I have a second breakpoint here, it stops at the second one. Number is 5, and it's going to now run this function, isWithinRange. I'll step in here, and again it takes me into the function. Values given the value 5, a min in, I put the in here because it's inclusive, is 1, and the exclusive max value is 11. I put a little bit of information about this function and how it's supposed to be used here using this documentation. This is what we call Doxygen documentation. It's very similar to a standard called JavaDocs, and this is how programmers communicate how functions work to other programmers. They write comments that look a little bit like this to each other. So when this function does its thing, it will run this logic here. This is going to evaluate to either true or false. This is a true or false statement, this is a true or false statement, and if both of these are true, then the whole thing will resolve to true. So let's go ahead and see how that works. A value is 5, 5 is greater than or equal to 1, so that's going to be true. 5 is less than 11, so that'll be true. True and true is true, which means this will be true. The if statement will trigger, which is what happened last time. And there we go. It did trigger, and there it is. So here I'm using another function. I could, if I wanted, put both of these things inside of yet another function. For example, I could make a function like this, void run some code, and I can call this whatever, whatever I want, and I will just cut and paste this here and run some code. This is a function. Main is actually a function. All of these, this is a function right here, this is a function right here. I haven't used isValidInput one yet. I'll show you how that works in a minute. But this right here is a function, and I'm going to go over the anatomy of a function a little bit. First, we start with a return type. A function that is void doesn't return anything, so I couldn't do this int a equals run some code because this doesn't return an integer. I could actually return is within range in here. I could type in is within range 1, 2, 3. This will return false, and false evaluates to 0, which means that this is actually a valid statement, and this, if I printed out A, it would return 0. I'll just go ahead and do that. A. There we go. Because 1 is not between 2 and 3. If I put -2 in here, now it would return 1, because when this returns true, true evaluates to 1. But this is a function, and what I did is I basically just took code that was in here and I moved it over here. And this actually serves quite a purpose. When you're able to take code out of one area and move it to another and reduce the amount of code that you're looking at in one area, that enables you to reduce the amount of complexity in one part of your program. And managing complexity is one of the key things that a programmer has to do. When you first start out programming and you haven't learned all the terminology and you don't know all the variables and you don't know all the functions and you're not comfortable with loops yet, all of that is the hardest part. All of that is really tricky. But once you get in the habit of using while loops and for loops and if statements and of thinking in pseudocode and turning your pseudocode into code, then the biggest problem about programming becomes managing complexity. And one of the most important tools that we have to managing complexity is making functions like this that will abstract pieces of code from one area and move it to another area. So now I want to show you how to use this other function that I made, isValidInput. And if you guys want to see any of this code, you can pause the video at any time and copy it down. So I'm going to take isValidInput and I'm going to use it here. I will do something like this. Do while isValidInput char letter equals underscore getch, while letter is A, E, I, O, or U, which are the vowels. So what I've done here is I've made it, and because of the way scope works, char letter only exists in these curly brackets here, and when it tries to run it in this while condition actually exists outside of these curly brackets. So if I want this to compile, I actually have to move the letter declaration to out here, and this will work just fine. So if I run this code, D. Oh, because it'll loop if it's valid input. So if I pressed A, it would loop and it would print 1 again. If I press E or A, if I can just mash A or I or O or U. If I press capital A, it stops because capital A is not one of the valid input letters. What valid input does is, here in this for loop, it basically runs through the entire array until it finds the null terminator and checks to see if any of the letters in the array are equal to the input argument that was passed into it. And if any of them are a letter from this array, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. There's a couple more things I want to show you about functions. First of all, I want to explain why this function here doesn't have any arguments. It's because I didn't want it to have any arguments. Here, main doesn't have any arguments either. But when I call a function that has no arguments, I still need to call it with these parentheses. Just like getch. Getch is a function. Main is a function, although we never call it. When you declare a function, you cannot declare a function inside of another one. So if I wanted to make a function called something like void draw a line int char letter int count, and I'm just going to make some code here that'll draw a line int I equals 0, I is less than count plus plus I, cout letter. This code right here will work just fine, and I can draw a line of pound signs 10 elements long, and when I do, there's our code, 10 pound signs in a row. But if I tried to take this function and declare it inside of another one, notice it's giving me this error here because I'm not allowed to do that. Whoa, draw a line undefined, yeah, because it wasn't declared correctly.